Coach Peter here. Want to go over what our ideal spot is for athletic nutrition. What should an athlete eat? We get these questions all the time about, hey, what should I be eating? Should I have supplements? All that kind of stuff. So we kind of broke it down into a couple different levels. So our first thing, again, just nutrition for athletes. And really, this is broad base. We're not looking for anything real crazy here, but what we want to focus on is making sure that our athletes are fueled and ready for their training and able to recover from it and all that good stuff. So we're putting a lot of time, energy, and money into training and into getting better for these sports. We want to make sure that we get the most out of those sessions and recover from them so that we, again, get the best bang for our buck and the best use out of that time that we're investing into it. So the first thing is, so we have level one. So number one is just make sure you're eating something before training. So we're going into school right now, whether we're in school and working out after school, or if it's an early morning thing, I want to make sure I'm eating something before training. It doesn't have to be a ton of stuff, but what we'll look for, or we'll talk about specific recommendations later, but I want to make sure that I'm getting something. This could be a piece of fruit. This could be a sandwich. This could be anything that's just, it doesn't have to be a lot. I don't want it to be real heavy in my stomach, but I want to make sure that I've got something. That's going to help and make sure that, one, we have fuel on board for the training session, and it's also going to kickstart the recovery process. So afterwards, we're ready to go and we're already starting that recovery from training. One of the things we say a lot is, I don't get better actually from training. I break myself down during training. I get better from recovering from training. So we want to make sure we kickstart that recovery process early in the phase of training. So eat something, doesn't matter too much what, we'll go over that a little bit more later, but eat something before training. Okay, number two, be hydrated, drink water. Okay, so a rough estimate for how much water a person should have, an athlete should have, is roughly half your body weight in ounces. So if I'm 200 pounds, I want to shoot for about 100 ounces of fluid. Most of that should be water, clear water, flavorless water. Okay, that's what we want to focus on. Sports drinks are great, but most of the time they're filled with sugar. There's a lot of other things in there that we don't necessarily need. They're not bad, but we should still mostly be focused on drinking water. Okay, cold, ice, doesn't matter. There's little things you can do to add a little bit of flavor if you need that. But again, mostly water. Soda, those types of things should be limited for sure. We don't want to have a ton of that on board, but mostly water. Sports drinks are okay here and there as far as that goes. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is eat 3 meals. Okay, and we'll define that here in a second. But we want to eat 3 meals a day. Okay, so throughout my day, a lot of times I see kids just eating snacks a lot. My kids eat snacks a lot, but that limits usually how well they eat their meals. Okay, our meals are much more set up to be a full, broad thing where I've got protein, I've got carbohydrates, I've got everything in that meal that I need. Most of the time when we snack, it's going to be things that are high in sugary carbohydrates and fat. So we're going to get a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily want a ton of in those snacks. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting 3 solid meals a day. Okay. And so that would be breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Again, we'll go over things in a second here about the specifics of those things, but we want to make sure in that level one, we're eating something before training. Okay, get some fuel in you before we train. Drink lots of water throughout the day. Aim for about half your body weight in ounces or just 8 glasses of water in a day. That's a really good start. Thirst can be good, depending on the kid. Sometimes it's a good indicator of what we need to do. Sometimes, my kids can be, sometimes not super observant of what is going on. So having that target of let's make sure we're getting 6, 7, 8 glasses of water, and it can be their size too. Like I'm going to give my my 9-year-old, he's not going to have 8 16-ounce glasses of water in a day. It's going to be more appropriate for his size. So that's That's where we would look for with that. And then eat 3 meals. Make sure you're getting breakfast. Make sure you're getting lunch. Make sure you're getting dinner. There's nothing magical necessarily about any of those things. It's just the consistency of it being a meal and making sure that we have, because it's most of the time going to be set up the way that we need it. Okay, so that's our level 1. And I'm going to start there with every kid. If they're not eating breakfast, we say, hey, what's going to make the next difference for this athlete is, hey, let's get some food. Let's make sure we're getting a meal in at breakfast time. Or if that needs to be a little bit later, pushed, into that, 10 o'clock time, that's fine. It doesn't matter. We just want to try to get 3 meals. I don't care too much about the timing of them as long as we're getting them in. And usually we want them to be spaced out fairly evenly throughout the day. Okay, so that's level 1. Level 2 now we're going to focus a little bit more on what to include in those meals, in those snacks, and how to structure it. Okay, so for level 2, we're going to look at those meals, and for every meal that we have, I want to have 1 to 2 palm-sized portions of protein. So I use hands a lot because it's hard to say if I said, hey, athlete, you need to have 150 grams of protein in a day. They're going to think, what the heck does a gram of protein look like? I have no idea. So, but we all walk around with these. We've got our hands on us. So we can usually have that measuring tool. A palm-sized portion of protein for, a high school kid is going to be anywhere from 25-ish grams of protein, plus or minus a little bit. And that's okay. So that's a good starting point. So now I say, okay, we're going to have 1 or 2 palms of protein. If we have that 3 times a day, I'm going to be in the neighborhood of where I want to be for that. Okay, so 1 to 2 palms of protein per meal. So breakfast, I'm going to have 1 to 2 palms of protein in that meal. Same with lunch, same with dinner. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense too. A chicken breast looks about like the size of your palm. I can visualize that on my plate. It looks like the size of a hamburger. All of those things will kind of give you an idea of what that looks like on your plate. The next one is make sure we're eating vegetables. And this is something that my kids, we try to get with, that they're doing something. Okay. Now what we use for the measurement for that is a fist. Okay. So instead of a palm, we just clench your fist, and that's about how much 1 to 2 fists of vegetables on your plate with every meal. We can also add fruits in there as well. There's a little bit of difference there, but fruits or vegetables is fine. 1 to 2 fists of vegetables or fruits at every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay, the last one that we'll focus on in our level 2 nutrition guidelines is 2 cupped handfuls of carbohydrates. Okay, so if you cup your hand and you fill it with, let's say, rice or beans or potatoes or something like that, that gives you a visual for what that looks like on your plate. So again, we can just kind of build our plate. If I'm visualizing my plate, I've got dinner in front of me, how much of each thing do I want? This gives us a visual for what that should look like on your plate. It's not perfect. That's okay. We're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for some consistency with fueling our bodies with the things that we need. Okay, so if I can get a kid to do this most of the time, 80% of the time, they're going to be doing really well. Nutrition is not going to be their problem if they're working on these things. It's when we see athletes skip breakfast or not have a snack, not eat anything before training. If they come and see us at 3:30 in the afternoon and they've had a banana for breakfast and maybe a couple, bags of chips for lunch, and then haven't had anything after that, they're not going to have a great training session. They're not going to feel fueled and ready to go. So we want to make sure, again, that they've got at least this level 1, eat something, drink water, have 3 meals a day. Okay, start there. Next, we'll start focusing on how do we build those meals at each of those times, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Okay, so that's level 2. The next thing we'll kind of talk about here is just what do those things look like? Different options, different ideas for proteins, mostly proteins and carbohydrates. Those are really the 2 that I want to focus on because that's where we see a lot of, what are they? What's a good source of those things? So we want high protein content in our meals. And so if we can include, for breakfast, a lot of times, eggs can be great, but not everybody likes eggs. And actually, we have in order to get kind of those 2 palms of protein from eggs, it ends up being a lot of eggs. So yogurt is great for that. That's a great meal to have for breakfast. Another one that you can do is just having a protein shake. Having just whey protein is probably the best way that you can do it. If for whatever reason you want a non-meat source or a vegetarian source, that's totally fine. You can do soy, you can do pea proteins and stuff like that. But a protein powder is I don't even consider a protein powder a supplement. It's a food source. Okay, so don't stress about that. It's a really good food source. And then focusing on lean cuts of meat. So things like chicken breasts, pork loins, leaner cuts of beef, fish are all great sources of protein. And again, if we focus on 1 to 2 palm-sized portions at every meal, we're going to make sure that our muscles are able to recover. All the growing that your athletes are doing these days, as they're getting bigger, protein is a part of all of that. And so making sure that they're getting those raw materials for that growth and for that recovery there. One thing I do want to highlight with protein is a lot of people will use peanut butter as a protein. There is protein in peanut butter, but it is not a good source. There's a very low amount of protein in peanut butter. So typically I say, let's focus on this. If a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is one of your snacks, great. That's absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with peanut butter. I just don't see it as a high protein source, a lean protein source. So I like focusing on these things. And then with my snacks, I can fill in with kind of whatever. I want to make sure that I've got stuff and I enjoy it. I like eating it. So if you like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, anything like that, or if you need to gain weight, a lot of times I put kids on, hey, you got to keep everything else the same. Now we're going to add in that peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something like that. Okay, so that's our protein sources. Focus on lean cuts of meat, yogurt, eggs, protein powders. Those are all good sources of protein. For carbohydrates, I kind of have level 1, level 2, and I'm not too concerned with anything on this first list. So potatoes, rice, beans, etc. Those are fantastic sources of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are what fuels our body. That's where we get the energy to train, to compete, to walk around. Okay, so we need carbohydrates. We want to make sure that we've got carbohydrates on board. Ideally, we're having lots of rice, beans, other grains like quinoa, things like that, potatoes, all really good sources of carbohydrates. I also have nothing against pastas, breads, anything like that. We need carbohydrates. Athletes can need them. So as long as we're filling in and we're getting good nutrients and we're making sure we're going back over here and getting fruits and vegetables, I'm totally fine having these because now we're going to have all the nutrient density that we need from there, and we're going to get our energy from pastas, breads, and stuff like that. Things that we want to limit, I already mentioned soda earlier. Is it the end of the world if you have soda? No. But should it be a mainstay or a staple in your diet? Probably not either. I don't want to rely on soda for the caffeine or anything like that. Energy drinks is a whole nother can of worms that we could open up. Stay away from them as much as possible. If you are needing an energy drink to go train, we know that probably your nutrition is not great, your sleep is not great. So let's make sure we're doing those other little things actually other big things that we're not putting a Band-Aid on with getting an energy drink before practice or before training. Junk food, I kind of classify junk food as anything ultra processed, potato chips, Doritos, like all those things. Really good. Again, nothing against them completely. You don't have to cut them out completely, but they shouldn't be a mainstay, a staple of your diet for your athletes. Again, we want to make sure that we get the most out of our training, the most out of our practices so that we can compete at the highest level of our abilities. If I make sure to get these things in there, I'm going to be able to do that. I'm going to have good energy. I'm going to have the building blocks for all of the recovery that I need to have happen. And I'm going to be able to compete at a really high level because of that. I'll also be able to enjoy these things every once in a while because there's nothing inherently bad about them, but they're just lacking some of the things we need and want to make sure that we're ready to compete at those high levels. So going back to kind of just overview everything we talked about so far, our nutrition for athletes. Level 1, make sure we're eating. That really is what it comes down to. Make sure we're eating something right before or within an hour before training. Make sure we're drinking water throughout the day. A good way to know whether you're hydrated or not is just your pee color. Okay, it doesn't have to be crystal clear or anything like that, but it shouldn't be, this color either. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough water so that we're hydrated. There's big decreases in performance, both physically and cognitively. So if kids are having a hard time with school, they might be dehydrated consistently, and our performance is not going to be there for that. And then make sure we're eating 3 meals a day. Once you're doing that, you have that down, you're eating consistently, and mom and dad, you can help with this part. If obviously you're feeding them, so you're going to be able to control this a little bit more. But we're going to be able to add this in there. That's our level 2, so we're making sure to get all those things in there. And so once we're doing all that, you're going to be in really great shape. You could get a lot more detailed in accounting macros and all that stuff. For most individuals, we do not need to get that level of detail in this. If you're doing this and you're just making sure we're building our plate with these things, we're in this amounts, we're going to be doing pretty good. So that's our level 1 and level 2 nutrition. Hopefully that gives you some good information to be able to take some action on. Simple tools, simple wins with nutrition, just things that you can do consistently. So try that out. Let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to help.